Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is week 12, Taiji and Qigong for ACCHS spring semester of 2021. And just this past weekend, we've passed a pretty important landmark on the seasonal calendar. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So we just passed this, we're in the spring equinox Qi node now. So equinox we know means equal night. So day and night are equal. We have now increasing length of daytime over nighttime. This ratio has been changing since the winter solstice, actually. But now we're actually in a place where the days will be longer than the nights. In the modern America, we call this the beginning of spring, but we know that on the Chinese calendar that this is actually not the beginning of spring, but rather the midpoint of spring. So spring begins when we first start to see yang gaining purchase over the wintry, quiet and cold of yin. So that happened a couple Qi nodes ago, and we can remark that even when spring begins on the traditional Chinese calendar, it's still very nascent. It's still very quiet. It's just the beginning of it. But now things are starting to build up a little bit. And I went out this morning and I saw that the potatoes that I planted a few weeks ago are finally actually bursting forth from the ground. My wife took the kids to the zoo and had to do a lot of explaining because the grizzly bears were mating and the turtles were mating. So there's a lot of yang energy in the air, and it's just going to continue growing. This is actually a sort of special time on the calendar. So let's read what we have from this book that I have, Three Treasures by our dear departed Liu Ming, who used to teach at ACCHS and was a gentleman that taught in the East Bay for many years, and especially dietary adjustments for seasonal health was his specialty. So spring equinox, yin and yang equality. At the spring equinox, the yin and yang are equal. A quivering yang arises and a shaky yin submits. So winter's finally sort of giving up the ghost and yielding to this yang energy that's rising. The day and night are equal in length. This Qi node marks one of 4 annual pivots that rectify the annual Qi. So this is a fundamental concept that during the year, there's 4 main pivots, which are the 2 equinoxes and the solstices. And this is a time where our behavior most deeply impacts how we're going to feel year round. So they call this an opportunity for rectification. If we act seasonally around these times, it gives us a little bit more wiggle room to act sort of coloring outside the lines during other times. So in lunar calendar terms, this is spring's midpoint. A prince's crown. So this idea of the young yang is symbolized by the prince, and him becoming crowned means instead of being under the guard of perhaps the Empress Dowager or the older people in the administration of the empire, the prince is now in command. He's beginning to reach adulthood. The idea yang is in charge from now on until we reach further into the end of summer. During this Qi node, the best Qi is available around dawn. You should practice Neigong or Qigong, facing due east, the direction of spring, and greet the dawn. Imagine that you inhale the true and pure yang of the sun from over the horizon as the light appears. Have it enter your body and refresh all your organs, channels, and joints. You will notice that all the winter's lethargy is gone, and if you have been cultivating spring, yang is no longer shaky. Plans and actions are enhanced. So finally, we actually have a supportive Qi to put things into action a little bit, to bring things from the theoretical into the actual. It is an ideal time for in-depth study, long walks, and consulting with diviners and astrologers. So if you want to get a reading, this is a great time of year to do it. It's thought to be that in these times of inflection, seasonal inflection, energetic inflection, these 4 axes, solstices and winters, this is a great time to actually divine and figure out bigger patterns that are moving and how you can coordinate your own personal activities with those. Focus and go forward. Do not forget the advice of the sages. Crows and ravens are sun creatures in the Chinese tradition. They will be rascally now all through spring and summer. So listen up for those crows and ravens talking to you in the morning. And then he has this great dish, which I'll send you all a copy of. This dish stimulates yang and jumpstarts the Qi of the spring. It is a Chinese classic, but this version is not as oily or sweet as the standard. There's spinach, which is cold natured, to balance the yang of shrimp, walnuts, eggs, and sugar. It's also thought to be a folk remedy for impotence, but he makes no promises. So we have a stir-fry shrimp, walnuts, and greens recipe here, which has a lot of cool ingredients, including hard-boiled quail eggs, a little bit of sake, some birch sugar, but you can substitute for other sugar as well, a light stock, a water, a fish, or a vegetable stock, as opposed to a heavier, denser winter stock, which would be made out of the deep bones from some larger mammal, right? So I'll post a copy of this recipe too, in case people are curious about it. And we can kind of take a look at this, these spring equinox pictures that I've posted here. The one on the left, I want people to take with a grain of salt. It shows you the Taiji symbol in the middle, the yin yang, in motion here. But I want everyone to notice the earth axis, that this earth axis in some texts, including probably the ones you're reading for Chinese medicine school, they say that the earth season is quote unquote Indian summer, or long summer is sometimes how they call it, which is the season in between the summer and the fall. But really, more accurately, this earth season occurs between all of the major seasonal transits. So we'll have an intermediate season when the spring gives way to the summer, and then another intermediary season when the summer gives way to the fall, and another intermediary season between when fall gives way to winter and winter to spring. And these are called interseasons, and these are thought to be the real earth seasons if we're looking at Qi nodes, right? So take a look at these couple of pictures just to reaffirm our understanding, and also be comfortable with this idea that, in our Chinese cosmology, often when we put up a representation of the seasons and as they rotate, we'll end up with, and also space, right? We may end up with south at the top and north at the bottom, right? And east is going to be on the left side and west is on the right side, which is the exact opposite of how we commonly orient maps in the modern era, right? So become comfortable with that, because we're going to see that again in our Chinese medicine education as we map yin and yang onto the body, onto the directions, and some other stuff. So to summarize, we're now in the middle of spring equinox. Yin and yang are in balance. Yang is more form. There's actually energy for forward progress and plans. So I actually have noticed this myself. Like, I've been meaning to clean out the garage, and finally, for some reason, this last weekend I did it. It's also in a lot of Central Asia, Persian New Year, Nowruz, is happening right now. So it is a time that some traditions actually call the beginning of the year. So there's reason for that as well. Although in East Asia, traditionally, we mark that a little bit earlier in the calendar when the yang is just beginning to bubble up. So take a look at sort of your own behaviors around spring equinox. See if there's ways that you can harmonize. We mentioned in our text here that a good time to practice is early in the morning. So getting up early in the morning and just letting this yang of the sun rising in the east as we start the day. This is sort of the spring equivalent, and let that just soak into your body and bones if you are up at that hour. So please review that. I want to continue to emphasize that the classical Chinese medicine is really, so much of it is about timing and harmonizing our own individual qi with the qi of the ambient environment, with the qi of space, and with the qi of time. We don't need to dig into deep principles of astrology, although that's open for some folks. But really, these getting ideas of the season and of the day are the baby step towards engaging and harmonizing our own internal rhythms with external rhythms, and eating harmoniously, moving harmoniously with these seasons, engaging activity harmoniously with the energy of the seasons. The other thing that I wanted to put on the table today, for maybe for a little bit of discussion when we meet on Thursday, is a sort of a precise summary of some of the reasons why we want to practice energetic cultivation, or Qi Gong, same thing, as healthcare providers. And so I included on the handout that you'll be receiving a little bit longer text on this, but let's touch on these briefly. Oh, here's a little bit more of an exhaustive image I found on the internet for all these different seasonal Qi nodes, right? And you have to take this a little bit carefully, because the compass orientation is a little bit different than what we had. As you can see, the vernal equinox is now up and the autumn equinox is down. So you need to spin this a little bit to kind of have it match the orientation of the prior diagrams, but it has a little bit more detailed information. If you're curious about this, I will post this when I post the slide, when I update the slides on the forum. And let's see, I think I put this behind. Yeah. So cultivation for healthcare providers. Why do we do it? This comes from a book called The Power of the Internal Martial Arts in Qi by one of my teachers, Bruce Kumar Francis, who was one of the early pioneers that went to Asia in the 70s and studied with Japanese, mainland Chinese and Taiwanese martial arts, and also Qigong practitioners, and then showed up in America and started teaching more Western audiences earlier, when some of the teachings were not as open for folks that hadn't gone over there themselves. So he has a long history of martial arts, but he also did practice healing practices. So his summary for why healthcare providers might want to practice martial arts. First, he talked about energizing the hands, and we've worked on that in class too. With this idea, we want to be able to open up the shoulders to get the energy from the trunk to get down to the hands, because this is a manual medicine that we're practicing, right? We're practicing with our hands to help people feel better. We also, not only are we giving treatments with the hands, but we're getting information from our hands, from palpating people, from palpating pulses. So this is very, very important for us as healthcare providers. We are very direct care when it comes to actual physical contact. So the hands touch the patient before the needles do, right? The second reason he has is to prevent burnout. So especially folks that come from sort of high intensity healthcare environments will tell you, and this can be anything from like, working in like spa massage context where you're giving lots of massages every day. It can be very exhausting, or from more allopathic models of like people that are nurses working long shifts or MDs working long shifts, or from acupuncturists. I've worked 8-hour community acupuncture shifts where, in that 8 hours, I've seen 25 or more patients. And by the end of the shift, you can be very exhausted if you don't have some way to kind of keep your energy up, right? And restore your energy. So preventing burnout is very, very real. Another concept he brings up is fostering healthy boundaries. Where he uses a word that I'm not crazy about when he talks about this. He talks about predatory patients, and I don't think there's anybody that's particularly predatory. Sometimes people do have an energy where they're looking to draw energy from the people around them. We could talk about energetic vampirism or predatory energetic practices. These aren't actually that difficult to counter if you have healthy boundaries and a good sense of your own center, right? You sort of develop a sense of who these people are, that might have an, I don't want to malign them, because often they're just very sick people that have advanced conditions that are looking for energetic resources around them. But we have ways to protect ourselves so that we don't accidentally give more than we are prepared to give for people. Obviously, as care providers, we are providing care, we are providing energy, and facilitating the movement of energy through people's bodies. But we don't want to drag anybody to health, and we don't want to feel more tapped out than we need to helping other people. And part of that is creating good, healthy boundaries. It also means that when we practices, especially like John Zhuang, standing like a post, you start to develop a very strong neutral, an energetic neutral. An energetic neutral goes a long way to understanding what you feel like. And when that starts to shift in the presence of somebody or something else, which direction the energy is moving and why it might be moving in that direction. So very neutral practices like sitting still or standing still are probably the quickest way to promote this, which is why they start, most serious energetic practices start out from that angle of like, let's find neutral. Let's find where we're not really doing anything. We're just standing there and feeling what is. And by developing a sense of that, we in turn develop a sense of when that changes due to circumstances, due to people, due to events, whatever it happens to be, and we're shifted off our center, and you can actually re-find your center in a lot of ways. Or if there is a particular negative or impactful energy coming your way, there's techniques that we can use to kind of dissolve it so that when it reaches you, it just kind of goes through you. One of my meditation teachers called this the window pane effect, where you just sort of become clear, a window pane, so whatever's happening just flows through you as opposed to taking up residence. And that's a lot healthier for our long-term health, right? And the last point that it brings up is connecting to bigger energetic resources. And this is a really, really big topic. If you are more sort of materially minded, this could be as simple as connecting to your feet so that you're moving people's bodies from a rooted stance, right? And so you're connecting with the ground to move people, right? Or if you're trying to disperse energy, just having a sense of open clarity in your own experience will help them find something that clears their channels a little bit, because we are resonant beings, right? If we are around certain energetic signatures, our bodies naturally resonate with those one way or another. It's why you can go to a sports game not knowing anything about the sport or the team and still find yourself cheering for people without even knowing why. There's this sort of ambient resonance of energy that happens, which maybe we have less experience of this year than we have in years past. But this connecting to bigger energetic resources can be a bunch of different things. And so people that have experience with Reiki know that this is a very big part of the Reiki practice. And there's other sorts of channeling practices and faith healing practices that are also involved in this. And we're not getting into these here. I actually believe that's a fairly complicated topic. I feel much more secure in telling folks about how to create practices that allow you to be very embodied and connect to the big things that are um, maybe have a little bit less energetic flavor than some other things. So the earth and the sky and your own center, these are very stable, safe resources that we can always draw on, and there's no real negative consequences of drawing on them. Whereas some people that get into more spiritualist healing and stuff like that may develop relationships with discarnate entities that might not be to their best long-term advantage. So that's a complicated topic that I don't want to get too into, but I will say that regular Qigong practice will open you up to this a little bit more. And for some folks, some folks that are maybe more involved in like the psychic community or something, it allows you to be more discriminating about which energetic resources you might be connecting with, right? So, it's sort of a classic story that many people that are very psychically open, sometimes it's very easy for them to lose their own sense of center, which leaves them vulnerable, and they need to learn sort of psychic self-defense techniques, which we're actually learning together. So just standing in neutral is a very, very strong psychic self-defense technique. Being able to hold your own space, feel the ground, feel the sky, and feel your center. This is very, 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 very good way to have a sense of self-defense for any kind of energy that you're not comfortable with, or that you want to work with in a very clear fashion as opposed to a haphazard fashion, right? So there's a little bit more information on the handout, as well as some acupoint vocabulary. When we meet on Thursday, we're going to review the significance of the spring equinox on the traditional East Asian calendar. We'll talk a little bit about the summary points from Bruce Francis about why we cultivate our Qi as healthcare providers, although we've made these points before, obviously. And maybe we'll talk about the recipe here, and we'll do some movement together. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to listen to this, and I look forward to seeing everybody on Thursday.